If you don't know Josephine Baker's name, you at least know the image of a beautiful woman dancing around in a skirt made of bananas. While that image made her iconic, she proved to be much more than that while researching for this episode. Josephine was born in the United States in 1906. The identity of her real father is debated, but it is speculated that he was white and rather influential since Josephine's mother was admitted to an all white hospital to give birth to her, despite being a woman of color. Her mother stayed 6 weeks in the hospital and had her expenses paid for her. This was rather unusual as at the time most black women gave birth at home. Furthermore, Josephine's birth was registered, which again was a rare occurrence for people of color then. But that didn't help Josephine later as she grew up in a low income neighborhood which had rooming houses, brothels, and apartments which lacked indoor plumbing. White families hired her for house chores or babysitting, but unsurprisingly, she was treated poorly by them. She was reminded not to kiss the white baby, and once a white woman burned Josephine's hands when she put too much soap in the laundry. Even before she entered her teens, she dropped out of school and started working as a waitress while sleeping in cardboard shelters and looking for food in the trash. At only 13, as she was street corner dancing, she met Willie Wells and married him, but divorced him only a couple of months later. In 1921, she married Willie Baker when she was just 15. She divorced him in 1925 but kept his name as she was already starting to get herself known professionally. At her insistence, a show manager recruited her for the St. Louis Chorus vaudeville show, later moving to New York where she found success in Harlem and later in two Broadway revues, Shuffle Along and The Chocolate Dandies. Her role involved being the last dancer at the end of the chorus line as she was deemed too dark-skinned to be in the center. She was to perform comically as if she didn't know the dance routine properly, only for her to come out during the encore with a performance that was not only correct but even more complex. Her talent put her in the spotlight and would make Josephine the highest paid chorus girl in vaudeville. In 1925, aged 19, Josephine went for Paris to appear in La Revue Negre, being paid $1,000 per month. Josephine would prove to be the right woman at the right time in the right place. During the early 20th century, France and other European countries started to become fascinated by Africa, its cultures, and its people. This led to the creation of the Negritude, a framework created by Francophone intellectuals which aimed to raise and cultivate black consciousness across Africa and the African diaspora. Paul Gauguin, Pablo Picasso, and Henri Matisse were among the Europeans who found inspiration in traditional African art. It was in this context that Josephine arrived in Paris. By far her most iconic act was during a show named La Folie du Jour, where she performed Danse Sauvage wearing a revealing costume which was made of a skirt from artificial bananas. Europeans went crazy for her, as they had never seen such a performance before. Josephine Baker was described as an exotic beauty, which fit perfectly in the emerging Art Deco style of visual arts. Josephine Baker would tour Europe in countries like France, Germany, Denmark, and so on, winning everybody over with her stage presence, being called a living African sculpture. Dolls wearing banana skirts were sold across Europe alongside postcards featuring Josephine in the same style. Furthermore, beauty editors advised white women to use walnut oil to darken their skin to look similar to the famed dancer, or you could use Josephine's own baker skin, a lotion which had the same effect. She became extravagant and started wearing diamonds and owned a pet cheetah named Chiquita. Among her fans were Ernest Hemingway, Jean Cocteau, and Pablo Picasso. Josephine maintained her fame by appearing in a couple of movies such as Siren of the Tropics and Zuzu, and even had a hit song in 1931 with Jeux des Amours. She received thousands of marriage proposals and had affairs with celebrities of the day such as Frida Kahlo. But one place resisted her own home country. Josephine went to America to star in the 1936 revival of the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway, but neither the public nor the critics were impressed. Time magazine calling her a Negro wench, with other reviews echoing the sentiment and mentioning she couldn't dance nor sing. Heartbroken, Josephine returned to France, where she married again and became a French citizen. Germany soon started World War II, and Josephine not only decided to stay, but she went to perform for the troops across Africa, Europe, South America, and the Middle East. More importantly, though, she joined the French resistance and carried important messages with her across the world. The secret messages were written with invisible ink on her sheet music, and because she had been a superstar in Europe for over a decade, she was not exposed to rigorous controls, nor were her motives for traveling questioned. After she had helped popularize the Charleston and hot jazz in Europe a decade before, she was now fighting for its freedom. She also hid weapons in Jewish refugees in her chateau. For her efforts, she received la Croix de Guerre and la Rosée de la Résistance and was made a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur by Charles de Gaulle. In 1951, she returned with newfound admiration to the United States, where she performed to rave reviews and commercial success. In Harlem, a parade of 100,000 people assembled to celebrate her and the title of Woman of the Year, received by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Unfortunately, her success would not last very long. Josephine always made it a point that she will not perform to segregated crowds, having it written in her contract that the audience should be integrated. Due to her immense popularity, show organizers didn't have a choice if they wanted Josephine on their stage. While on her American tour of 1951, Josephine found herself being refused service at a store club, which had an unwritten policy to discourage black clientele from attending. Also in the crowd were American actress Grace Kelly and American columnist Walter Winchell. Seeing the moment, Grace Kelly took her entourage and vowed to never return there, living with Josephine, with whom she would become good friends. Despite being previously a supporter for the civil rights movement, Winchell didn't do or say anything, which upset Josephine and called him out on it. Walter didn't take this too kindly. He had already tarnished the reputation of American aviator Charles Lindbergh because he opposed the American intervention in World War II, and now Josephine Baker was his new target, accusing her of communist sympathies, which was a serious charge at the time. This led to Josephine having her work visa terminated, and she could not be allowed into the country until almost a decade later. The columnist also suffered some reputation damage in a karmic event. She spent most of the 50s adopting children of different racial and ethnic backgrounds as she pushed to prove to the world all races could live together in harmony and calling them the Rainbow Tribe. Her children were Ivorian, Moroccan, Algerian, Japanese, Korean, Israeli, Colombian, Venezuelan, French, and Finnish, and even raised them having different religions to further prove her point. This was highly controversial as it was unheard of a black woman adopting a wild child, and furthermore she was accused of using her children for her own gain, as she allowed visitors, for a fee, to observe them in the estate playing, singing, and dancing for the audience. One of her children would later defend her, quote unquote. She was a great artist and she was our mother. Mothers make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Josephine also spent her time touring the world to give speeches about race equality and to criticize America's policies, comparing them to those of Hitler's. Quote, unless there is a halt to the waves of lynching, electrocutions without proof, collective aggression, and other beauties of the American way of life, it means that all the blood spilled in the last war has been in vain. The apparent enemies of Hitler see his triumph multiplied in the southern United States. End of quote. Josephine Baker, Buenos Aires, 1952. In 1963, she delivered a speech at the March on Washington, being the only official woman speaker. After the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, his widow asked Josephine to become the new leader of the civil rights movement, but after considering it, Josephine declined as she said her children were, quote unquote, too young to lose their mother. She continued her shows throughout the decade from Cuba to Romania, but despite critical success, the demand for her act was slowly fading. In 1968, Josephine lost her castle to unpaid debts, but her old friend Grace Kelly, now Princess Grace of Monaco, offered her and her children an apartment in Monaco. In 1975, Josephine celebrated 50 years in show business with a retrospective review at the Bobino in Paris, financed by Princess Grace and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, which proved to be an enormous success. She died of a cerebral hemorrhage 4 days later, age 68. With such a full life, what exactly is Josephine Baker's legacy and why is she iconic? While researching this, I couldn't believe what incredible life Josephine Baker has had. But despite everything, she's mostly known for one thing. Even if those moments are not all iconic, they surely deserve a shout out. Firstly, she has a rags to riches story which beats any movie. She went from eating from dumpsters to Europe's number one sensational diva, and all through hard work. Secondly, Josephine Baker can be seen as the definition of the strong independent woman archetype, which is even more surprising if you take into consideration the time period and the fact that she was black. Check out my Hattie McDaniel video for more context on American entertainment during the period when Josephine was popular. Her story could be adapted to present day without a problem and serves as a role model for all women. If the relationship doesn't work, leave. Her fight for racial equality is truly worthy of appreciation, as she refused to stay silent even when her home country was hostile towards her. After being racially humiliated and abused as a child and seeing the huge difference between Europe and America, being treated as a superstar in the first one but mistreated even as a superstar in the latter, she advocated for international racial harmony. Long before Angelina Jolie and Madonna, her decision to adopt 12 children of different backgrounds was controversial, but clearly her intentions were good. Josephine Baker also became the first American woman to receive full French military honors at her funeral for her services during World War II. But in history's eyes, nothing could beat her banana skirt, and that's maybe because it was more than just a stage outfit. Around this time, Western Europe was more open to certain aspects of the human sexuality, such as homosexuality, fetishes, and transvestites. In this new light, Josephine, wearing a phallic symbol around her waist, is almost postmodern in the way it does deliver with race and gender. Her athletic body appealed to both men and women. She was genderless but also feminine and masculine at the same time. As a woman fascinated by the works of Freud, her appearance was not a coincidence. Josephine wore the banana dress or variations of it from 1926 to 1936, which coincides with the most free years of the early 20th century, and she stopped wearing it just as society was returning to its more conservative roots. Josephine Baker's stage persona was a contradiction of genders, of savage and civilized, of what's glamorous and what's humorous, naivety and calculation, blackness and whiteness. She exposed the hypocrisy of straight white men who were lusting after her in a time when it was forbidden. The negrophilia of the 1920s Paris made Josephine a star, considering her as exotic and natural, as the heteronormative white society was now considered too rigid, from the way of speaking to its dances. For the white French, it was a way of discovering the black civilizations they only heard of, which was seen as a way to rejuvenate the old white continent, and Bronze Venus, or the Black Pearl as Josephine was nicknamed, did just that. Her Charleston and jazz dance moves were seen as ultra primitive and ultra modern. Josephine was amused by the feverish reviews, as quoted by Phyllis Royce. Quote unquote. Primitive instinct, madness of the flesh, tumult of the senses. The white imagination sure is something when it comes to blacks.